Welcome to Dance Unscripted. I am your host, Amy Elizabeth, and I am thrilled to have Rebekah Chappell joining us in the conversation on resiliency and dance. Rebekah is a teaching artist, performer, and dance maker, holding an MFA in dance from the University of Iowa, and has engaged in teaching practices in studios, community programs, public and private schools, and universities from across the country. Our conversation today will be exploring how we can foster resilient communities capable of meeting the challenges of the contemporary movement, as Rebekah takes us through her recent research, exploring strategies to prevent burnout, centering on communities of care. Rebekah, thank you so much for joining us today and bringing your research to our listening community.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So, I would like to begin with a little bit more information about you, your background in dance, kind of what led you to focus on burnout prevention and fostering resilient communities.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amy. So as we mentioned, my name is Rebekah Chappell. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white cisgender female, and I'm currently located in Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm a mama to two amazing, curious little ones, Ellie and Evan, who are 9 months and 2.5 years old. And a lot of my life right now has been trying to figure out what sustainability looks like for me inside of dance as I kind of navigate this huge transition and identity from like someone whose time was my own to really figuring out how to navigate my family life and my work life and my own kind of curiosities and explorations in this world, and what how all of those things kind of fit together. Um, and inside of that, I have this kind of pattern as a human being where I love what I do, and so I take on so many things, and then I find myself absolutely exhausted and depleted. And then I kind of like go in this little hibernation incubation period, and then I just kind of like repeat that cycle all over again. And so I've been kind of curious on like how do I live inside of dance as a field? How do I live inside of my own life as a parent, as a human being, more sustainability? Like what would that look like? What would that feel like? Um, yeah, so those are kind of the things of my identity that's relating to this research that I'm doing and kind of how I arrived at this moment.
Yeah, this is the word relevant comes to mind because a lot of our listeners, I would say, are about the same in the same boat. We've been talking a lot on this podcast thus far about the idea of we are multitude. We are
Mm,
complex humans. We are not one thing. And when we're so passionate about what it is that we do, it's so hard for us to say no or not right now. So, can you
mhm.
kind of give us a description of what your dance identity is? What do you do in the dance world?
Oh yeah, I love that so much. So, my early training in dance was inside of classical ballet. And my professionalism loved classical ballet. I felt right at home inside of that practice. I loved kind of the idea of the ritual of bar, of center work, of kind of class as a place where I knew exactly what to expect. I knew what was going to be asked of me. Um, but I had a hard time finding success in ballet due to my physicality. I don't necessarily have some of the traditional attributes that are associated with ballet. So I found myself kind of hitting wall after wall when it came to professionally seeking work inside of that form. And so, yeah, I was determined to keep dancing. In fact, when I was in kindergarten, I wrote, when I grow up, I will dance on the stage. And this is important that I said I was going to dance on the stage because at some point in time, as I was hitting a wall with ballet again and again, I thought to myself, dance on the stage. That doesn't mean that I need to live inside of this form only. So I became really curious about what other ways I could find ways of dancing on the stage. And improvisation actually was the kind of first practice that really spoke to me after ballet, which is funny because it's often seen as kind of being on the opposite spectrum
Yeah.
of ballet. But I think what I loved about improvisation was that it became my own like personal practice and ritual of like going into a studio, of just like moving for the sake of moving, of finding a way to kind of really listen deeply to my own body and what it was telling me, which was something that I feel like I had really cut off in my life up until
Hmm.
that point. So I started this research project called 365 Days of Dance, where my goal was to record myself improvising every single day for 365 days. And I didn't end up making it to 365 days. I think somewhere along day like 200, I stopped posting the videos online. This was like before Instagram, before Snapchat, before like all these kind of social platforms. It was like on my
Yeah.
little website. I was just like posting these videos to keep myself accountable. But in that, I just really found this love for improvisation and starting to think really broadly about improvisation, not just as like a dance form, but as like a daily practice.
Hmm.
Yeah, so around that time, I was living in Houston, Texas, which is where Amy and I originally crossed paths.
Yeah.
I started dancing for local dance companies and projects, um, all kinds of different things, just like really trying to figure out where my place in dance was. And then I got this opportunity to teach at San Jacinto College South, and I discovered that I absolutely loved teaching, and I really liked teaching in higher education. And so in order to be able to pursue that more seriously, I needed an MFA, a Master of Fine Arts in Dance. So I did lots of research on like where can I do that? And I went to the University of Iowa in Iowa City. I'd never been to Iowa. In fact, I'm not even sure I could have found Iowa on a map when I went to audition.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I was accepted into the program, and decided like, okay, this is what we're doing. So my husband and I left Houston, we moved to Iowa, and I had two of the most incredible years of my life, surrounded by these amazing artists who really kind of challenged the ways that I thought about dance, and the role of dance, and not only my own life, but in communities and world making. Um, yeah. So then after that, I did a stint of teaching in higher education full time, and then part time once the pandemic hit. Um, and yeah, I continue to teach in higher ed, which I love. I think I like the different student populations that I get to teach inside of higher education. I like the kind of intellectual um, component of that. But I continued teaching in the studio setting. In fact, I was my daughter's first dance teacher. We did a parent and me class together last summer. Um, and yeah, I continue to make dances, and I'm leaning into a lot of writing right now in this season of
Mm.
my life. Um, yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of who I am as an artist, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else important. I think that about summarizes it.
Yeah. I want to swing back to this transition between ballet and improvisation because I love the act and the art of improvisation. And I mean, first of all, congratulations on making it over 200 days. I mean, that's really an accomplishment to do something for 365 days. We all know that is a complete challenge. So congratulations on hitting over 200. And I actually believe that we connected and I saw you do a recording once in the studio after a class or something. So I don't remember exactly when and where that was, but you were telling me about this 365-day project. And of course, my initial thought was, uh-huh, good luck with that. But it is really impressive. But something that I found interesting is you referred to your preference for ballet being grounded in the ritual of it and knowing what
Mhm.
the expectation was for you in that practice. And then, yes, a lot of people see improvisation as the complete opposite. There is no expectation. The expectation is completely removed, and it's of the moment, in the moment, spontaneous. However, finding a way to make that practice a ritual
Mm.
by saying, I'm going to do this for 365 days. It set an expectation, maybe not the expectation that ballet did, but being able to find that transition. Did you find that experience, or how did you find that experience? Gratifying, challenging? How did you live in that, knowing what your preference was and what you're choosing to do?
Yeah, I think that I often set these little goals for myself. So I think that that is in general like my part of my practice that I kind of need that trajectory
Mm-hmm.
to like get me I think it comes down to accountability. That's the word I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
for. So there's something about creating some sort of trajectory for myself over time that allows a form of accountability, that allows me to build a practice over time, that allows this kind of consistency, that allows me the time to kind of deepen and for something to permeate and for me to figure out and process and integrate it into my own systems.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that for me that I needed that when I was starting out as like a really early improviser, just like going to improvisational classes or being in improvisational practices with others. It wasn't enough for me to like figure out how that thing was going to operate for me.
Mm-hmm.
I needed like some time to really like sit with it and time as like a daily thing and then time as like a sustained over a long period. Um, and so most of the time, like with that improvisational practice, like I might have only uploaded on my website like, I don't know, a minute, 5 minutes. But that generally was just this like teeny tiny window of what was a substantially much longer practice for myself over the course of that day. I think the thing that also worked for me a lot about that 365 days is that it stripped this idea that like dance practices happened at a particular time and place. Because if I was committing myself to doing this thing every day, I had to do it wherever I was. So I had to do it like if I was at home that day, like I didn't have access to a studio, like then where was my studio? Could my studio be my bedroom? Could it be my bathroom? Could it be my closet? Could my studio be the fence outside of my house? I committed to doing that practice like when we were on vacation. Like I have beautiful memories of traveling to Alaska for a family wedding during that time period and just being like, I committed myself to this practice, so here I am going to do this practice wherever I am. And I think that was part of the beauty of that as a start for me is that it shifted up until that point. I think dance was something that happened in a studio, and it really like shifted that for me. This idea that like practice could be anywhere. Um, yeah, so I think that those were the reasons why like I needed that as I entered into improvisation as a form and how it
Mm-hmm.
kind of set me along a path that then allows improvisation to have much more of like a fluid sense in my life. And as a parent, I like improvise all day, every day. I have no idea what's going to unfold with my
Yeah.
children. I can have such a clear plan of like, this is what we're going to do today. And then, like my kid eats her poop and like, okay, the whole day is
Oh
derailed. We have to like shift, we've got to improvise, we got to like figure out what the day is going to look like. Um, yeah, so I think that there was something about improvisation as practice that's really served me as an artist, and I'm really glad that I found it when I did in my
no. Yeah.
career. Um,
Yeah. I mean, as an artist and as a person, and a lot of these things that we practice or that we talk about in the studio translates. It's that cliche we hear all the time, the dance is life and life is dance. It may sound like a cliche, but we live it.
mhm.
And it sounds as if doing this movement practice every day really enhanced and empowered you as a person, as a mother. going into the world each day and understanding that each day is a new day and a playground of
Mhm.
sorts.
Mhm.
That sounds really empowering. So in mhm, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. We'll cut this out. But in the materials that I've read of the research that you are doing, you say it is possible to create sustainable, repeatable systems that collectively interrupt patterns of burnout. So,
Mhm.
first, can we identify what what is burnout, or how do we
Yeah.
define burnout, or maybe even what are signs of burnout?
Yes, I would love to talk about that. Yeah, so I started researching burnout because I had this feeling of exhaustion and I was curious, is this exhaustion like burnout? Would it meet a definition of burnout? And so I have some notes for myself as we enter this part of the conversation. So according to the World Health Organization, burnout syndrome is an occupational phenomenon resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So what's really
Mm,
interesting to me is that burnout as like defined by institutions is directly connected to our work. Um, and that is really fascinating to me as a parent. And I know that there's folks out there that are kind of doing some research as burnout as it connects to that form of caregiving. But for the context of kind of our conversation today, I'm going to be
mhm.
looking at and talking about burnout really from this very specific location of like the places that we work.
Okay.
And so burnout has been characterized since the 1970s as kind of having three components. And you need kind of all three of these components for someone in a medical profession to be like, yes, you are experiencing burnout. And so those three components are emotional exhaustion, which is sometimes defined as the fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. Then there's what they call depersonalization. So this kind of depletion of empathy, this depletion of compassion. And then the third component, which is I think is really interesting to me, because this is the one that I tend to feel the most inside of burnout, is this idea that like what you're doing doesn't matter. This
Mm,
idea that there's like a sense of futility that like um, that your efforts just don't have any value, don't have any impact in the world. And this is tied to this kind of component of what they call personal accomplishments. Um, so this kind of definition came about in the 1970s. They were specifically looking at people who are in people work professions, so doctors, nurses, educators, people whose jobs are interacting with others. And so psychologists created this inventory, a burnout inventory that measured kind of the frequency and intensity of your personal feelings and attitudes as they related to those three components that we just talked about. So emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment. So burnout is like a combination of experiencing those three things at the same time. So that's really fascinating to me as an educator because obviously as educators, what we do is people work.
mhm.
And while the nature of our relationships with students is sometimes primarily in the studio, it often bleeds into life outside of the studio. Um, because as artists, we are working with ourselves
It's the whole
and
person.
everything yeah, that is ourselves, we're bringing into the space with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I'm defining burnout, how I'm thinking about burnout. And I came to it again because I had this question of like this feeling that I'm feeling, um, that I keep feeling again and again and again and again in this kind of cyclical way. Like, can I get out of it? Is this
Mm,
necessary? Is this just like the seasons? Is this like my summer? And, after summer, I'm always going to need a fall and winter? Or am I like trying to make endless Texas summer that will last like 9 months out of the year and is probably like not sustainable for this, planet? Um, so that's how I kind of came to burnout. Um, so at first when I was looking at burnout, I was looking at like what I could personally do to not feel burnout. And I like, looked and read a lot about boundary setting because I'm terrible about setting boundaries. And I was like, if I can just do better at boundaries, then I won't get burnout anymore. So I had like a season of life where I was like all about burnout. We're all about boundaries. And I like created these little like reminders for myself on like before you say yes to something, like give yourself 24 hours to make sure that that yes is actually a yes and not in the moment like, oh yeah, I can do that. Or I would give myself the boundary of like 1 day a week. You're not going to touch anything related to your employment and work. Like you're going to have 1 day where like you don't do any grading, you don't send any emails, you don't go to the studio, you don't go to rehearsals, you don't go to performances, you don't read for your like research. You will do nothing that has to do with your life and dance. So I tried like all these like personal strategies and like created these little like systems, so to speak, habits, patterns, ways
Mm-hmm.
of being. And I still felt burnout. And I was kind of like, what the like I did the things they told me to do.
Yeah.
Like I did the self-care. I like
Yeah.
did the
I'm doing the
rest.
work. I'm
Like,
doing the work. I'm invested
yeah,
in this. I'm making changes, and we want progress. We want to see some shift in that.
exactly. But the shifts weren't happening.
Mm,
So I was just like, what is this? I don't understand. And so as I do, I got curious and was like, let's see what other people who are like far smarter than me have to say about this. And I started doing a lot of like reading about burnout. Um, and I think something that really kept coming up for me was this idea that like um burnout is not an individual phenomenon, it's a relational phenomenon. Like if we come back to the scales of burnout, like emotional exhaustion is the fatigue from caring too much. Like that's
mm-hmm.
relational. Like to care is to be in relation with somebody outside of yourself. Like this idea of depersonalization, the depletion of empathy. Like again, empathy, compassion, this is me in relation to somebody else. And then personal accomplishments, this feeling that what you're doing is not making a difference. Again, that means that your work is having impact on somebody else. And so when I was starting to read this, that relational component really jumped out to me and was like, oh, that's like what's missing for me is like thinking about burnout as a relational phenomenon and not something that like I can individually
Mm-hmm.
um work my way out of. Even that language of like work my way out of it.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so that was like the first like ding 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 ding. Okay, I think I'm onto something. Um, and so I started noticing more and more on how these scholars that are looking at burnout are talking about that relational piece, and I became really curious about that. Yeah.
So you talk about this identifying patterns of burnout. You kept feeling this over and over and over again. Can you explain a little bit more about what the pattern looks like? And then you had
Mm.
discussed these systems, these recurring systems that potentially could help break that burnout. So can you explain more about the systems that you're referring to?
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of like the pattern of burnout and how that was showing up, um, I think for me, a lot of burnout expresses itself in disassociation. So
Hmm.
the more burnout that I feel, the more I tend to like shut down sensations, that shut down feelings, shut down emotionality and expressivity in that way. So for me, that when I'm in a state of disassociation, it's a good moment for me to like pause and be like, okay, where am I feeling depleted? Where am I feeling a sense of scarcity? Where am I feeling a sense of under support? And how can I kind of re-pattern towards connecting with myself in these like physical, spiritual, mental kinds of ways rather than creating this like distance it, instead of creating distance. So
Mm-hmm.
that's for me how the pattern of burnout shows up, is by trying to create as much space between myself and the world and my own sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And then systems for interrupting that. I think right now, like that looks different depending on where I'm locating professionally. So I can give you some examples of some
Yes, please.
systems that have really worked for me and help me feel a lot more supportive in my work, and have allowed me to step away or create boundaries or do what I need to do in order to not find myself in the pattern of burnout. And I think the one that I'm most excited to share is probably one that people are going to have some like resistance to. Um, and that's I had to go on maternity leave, right? I had these
Mm-hmm.
babies. I had these babies like real close together. Um, and I was working full time at Austin Community College in Austin, Texas. And I had an amazing position where I was adjunct faculty. And then I also was what they called an instructional associate. So in my role as an instructional associate, I was working with dance majors specifically on building a culture of belonging, and so I was devising a lot of programming that would support our dance majors um, within the program. So, in order to go on maternity leave, my department chair asked me to kind of like create a little Google Drive of like, these are the things that I would normally do while I'm on maternity leave. And here's like a little synopsis on like what the process looks like to do that thing. Um, and so, I did that of over the 9 months leading up to like actually needing the maternity leave. So it wasn't like a big extra thing for me to do. It would just be like every time I went to do something as a part of my job, I would just open the Google Drive and be like, dance club. Here's a little description of what my role is for dance club. And I would just like put it in this little Google Drive. And over time, I like created this little archive of like what it my position contained on like a daily basis and then like over the trajectory of a couple months because I was on maternity leave for 3 months. And the beauty of this little document was that it meant that like I really could have stepped away at any time. And someone else would have been able to seamlessly like take on those responsibilities without like needing me to talk through anything with them, without me needing to explain anything, without me needing to like, be there to kind of start the thing and then sneak away. Um, and I just realized that for us inside of dance, often we find ourselves in these positions where like I can't step away because no one else can do what it is that I do. Like I can't
Mm-hmm.
not be here on this for this thing because who no one knows how to do the thing that I was supposed to do. That like um and so what I loved about creating this Google Drive is that it took that away. It took away that pressure for myself of like, well, what if I go into maternity leave early? Like, are they going to be able to run these events that I have planned? It's like, well, yes, because all along the way, I've been just making this like little document that gives like a little overview summary of this thing. So like, if I go into labor early, it's not a big deal. Someone else can like take care of it. And I don't have to like be worrying about work while I'm laboring.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that became a really great system for me and thinking about what it is that I do as an artist of like, can I leave some sort of a trail of something, so that if I'm in the midst of teaching, in the midst of a project, in the midst of a performer, that like someone could step in without it being a burden, both to me and to the other person. Um, and I think that this really came up for me, this idea of like creating this little like Google Drive system. Also really came up for me because another project that I've been working on simultaneously has been looking at grief and parenthood. And I've been interviewing a lot of parents about the grief that they have experienced in their journey to becoming parents. And something that just came up over and over and over again is this like adage we have in the arts of like the show must go on, of like this thing
Hmm.
was happening to me and I still felt like I had to show up because the show must go on. And so I just became really curious about that little adage we have of like the show must go on, of like could we say the show must go on, but instead of that meaning you have to show up no matter what's happening in your life, could the show go on without you because you've built the sustainable system, or we don't have to have you there in order. And not we don't have to have you there in like a um, you're irreplaceable, which is another kind of thing that we often hear inside of the arts.
Yes.
But like, we don't have to have you there because you can step back and we'll step up for you, as a form of care.
Hmm.
Um, so that's something that is one example of like systems. Um, I think another example of a system that I have absolutely loved exploring inside of Burnout is this idea of how we practice no as a
Hmm.
community, and how we practice no as like every single layer of what we do, we practice no. So like for example, one way we could practice no with our students is like the material I'm giving you in class is a container. And so you get to make that container what you need it to be on that day. So maybe your way of practicing no is being like, I can't jump today because I'm noticing that there's this like tightness in my ankles and calves, and jumping is not going to serve me as a dancer. So I can practice saying no by like modifying that material. And I don't have to ask, I don't have to make a big whoop of it because we have like created a culture where we practice no. Um, so I think of that as also like from the micro level to like a macro level of like what do these things look like in our daily interactions, and then in these like big picture moments when like, someone's having a baby.
Yes. It's interesting. I've had a couple of thoughts what you were saying, and this idea of the Google Drive and your presence. And I feel like so often it's not just in the dance world, but it's in our employment, in our occupation, in this idea of everyone is replaceable.
Mhm,
And growing up, I was taught they need to understand they need you. That is what my workforce, in air quotes, my workforce training taught me,
mhm,
was that if they need you, you can sustain your job. If they
mhm,
don't need you, you can't sustain your job. And in dance, yes, we've heard this, all dancers are replaceable, these sorts of things. But I feel like that is something that everyone, in a sense, has this practice of, yes, but if I'm not there, then someone else will get fill in the blank. Someone else will get the
mhm,
race. Someone else will get the promotion. Someone else
mhm,
will get this position or this prize or the raise or whatever it is. And there's very much this almost attack effort
mhm,
to try and prove, this idea of constantly proving that you're the only one that can do it. And I am saying this with a lot of passion because I too feel this. This is something that I'm actually learning
mhm,
right now in my role at the university, and bringing in a colleague, and what does it mean to share this role, and what does it mean to for them to feel equally empowered as I do,
mhm,
and what does it mean to, we talk about owning your percentage. I don't have to have 100% of the pie at all times.
mhm,
why does that other person, why does this colleague, this partner, someone who is equally as valuable and as brilliant, why am I taking from them? And what does that look like to share? And so I feel like I'm looking at it through a different lens, I think, than burnout.
Hmm.
But it to me, they're connecting in the ideology of how we feel about our role and our importance in that role, and how giving some of that percentage to my colleague isn't necessarily me giving up anything. Actually, it's
Hmm.
maximizing our reach, but it's also making space for me to ensure that I can sustain.
Hmm.
Does that kind of sound what you're talking about there?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that at least for me in my training, my philosophical training within the arts, so like the
Yeah.
things that were like implicitly but also explicitly told, like this idea everyone's replaceable, that's like an
Mm-hmm.
explicit thing that we have definitely been told inside of dance. Um, I think it really lends itself to the scarcity mindset, this idea
Mm,
of that like someone else has to not get the part in order for me to get the part. Or
yes.
like there can only be one person in charge. And so if I give up any of that power, then I risk losing all of it. Or there's just these things that have been implicitly and explicitly told to us that reinforces the scarcity
Mm-hmm.
mindset. And I think burnout and scarcity mindset are so intertangled because I think one of the ways we find ourselves into burnout is because we are trying to be everything to everyone in all
Mm-hmm.
circumstances at all times. And I think that like if we shift burnout from this individual to this kind of interpersonal relational, then it asks us like what kinds of relationships are we cultivating and we fostering, and like how important is that to the work that I'm doing? So like I can make this Google Drive and know that like all the details for this event are inside of it, but any one of my colleagues that would facilitate that event, it would be a completely different experience.
Yes.
And so if I like think of that my value, my worth, and being like um, who I am and who I am and how I move through the world, rather than what it is that I do and what it is that I produce, then I think it like really, really like shifts your relationship to scarcity mindset. Like my value in a department is not what I produce for that department. It's not in like what someone can consume of my like my labor, but like my value is in that relational component. I think that there's a quote, and I don't remember who said it. I kind of want to say it's Maya Angelou, but that may not at all be true. But this idea of like people don't remember what they said, they remember how you made them feel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that really comes to mind for me and moving away from like a scarcity mindset, that like uh, fostering an environment where we prioritize our relationships with one another is like how we're gonna disrupt the like capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchal, imperialist ways of being that tell us that like it's me versus everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as artists, collaboration is so important.
Hmm.
It is so important. I mean, dance is not a solo sport. We will
Hmm.
not do this on our own. Even if you are a soloist on this stage, there's still someone pushing play on that music for you. There's still someone turning on the lights for you. There's still an audience showing up to watch you. It's not a solo sport, but yet we've spent a lot of time trying to do it on our own. But I don't, like I
Hmm.
said, I don't think that's isolated to dance. I think that is a part of our
No.
culture, and what we've been taught is appropriate. And I find this really interesting. A lot of this is echoing back. I read a lot of leadership books. I
Hmm.
feel part of being an educator is being a leader, especially in higher education. It is such a pivotal moment in these young people's lives.
Hmm.
And I know that as an undergraduate, I had a couple of situations, conversations that really shifted my perspective and my trajectory in my career.
Hmm.
Um, whether they be positive or whether they be negative. Because
Mhm.
we've all had both.
Mhm.
And I remember one instance in particular that I didn't realize at the time how far it had shifted me and how much power that professor's words had. It wasn't until decades later that I thought, oh, I think this may have been the seed that planted this ideology about myself and how I feel about myself and how I see myself. And
Mm.
since I've had that aha moment, how I speak to, how I engage with, what my role is in the room, and understanding my power, understanding that authoritative voice. And so constantly always trying to understand what it means to be a leader. And a lot of the things I hear about being a leader is being able to step out of the room. is
Mhm.
is that it's not about you going in and telling people what they shouldn't do or what they shouldn't think. It's about empowering them. It's about showing them options and pathways so that they can move forward, rise up, and do it on their own. And the difference between a manager or a boss and a leader. And I think in the educational world, seeing ourselves in the front of that room, yes, I own that room when I walk into it, but understanding my power and owning that room and what that relationship is and what my contribution is to the students, that we're constantly challenging to move forward, push forward, keep going, and then also trying to see them for the humans that they are, and recognizing us as the adults, recognizing the burnout in the young people that may not even know, have that
Mhm.
vocabulary yet of what that looks like,
Mhm.
and then making space for them. So we've talked a little bit about how you've incorporated these repeatable systems and how they've kind of helped to transition and shape things for you, but how have they shifted your approach as a dance educator?
Yeah, so yeah, it's funny that you should ask this now. Um, So I would say this is like a season of my life where I feel like very vulnerable and very messy,
Mm-hmm.
where like I don't necessarily feel like my best self is the person that's entering the space in any given moment, like sleep deprivation, like distractions between like
Mm-hmm.
what's happening with my children, like a pull to be like more present in their lives. Um, and so there's been a lot of moments where I've left teaching, been like, well, I don't know what that was. And I expressed that to my students most recently at the end of the semester. I said, to be honest with you, like, if I had to give myself a grade for my own teaching this semester, it'd be like a low C. Like,
Mm.
I showed up to every class, but like, mm, there was some days where I left being like, I don't know what that was. And I said, like that's difficult for me at the end of the semester to like look back and critically reflect and be like, ooh, like I I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really funny because my students said like we actually feel like the messiness that you showed up inside of was what we needed to learn this semester.
Mm. That is beautiful. Again, Rebekah, thank you so much for sharing this time with us. I know it's going to be beneficial to educators and students alike, and I'm wishing everyone more success with working through burnout, systems, and self actualization. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Dance Unscripted, presented by AIM Dance. You can find more about Rebekah at RebekahChappell.com. I found this to be such a great conversation for dance educators and students alike. I really appreciate the tools that Rebekah offered to us to navigate through burnout in our personal and our professional lives. Be sure to click the subscribe button and share with a friend or colleague. If you'd be so kind as to provide a review on Spotify, your name will be entered into a drawing for Dance Unscripted merch. Winners will be announced at the end of each episode. A huge thank you goes out to the Lamar University Center for Resiliency for bringing season 1 to you. The Dance Unscripted team know that you could have chosen any platform, but you chose us and you chose dance. And for that, We are incredibly grateful. We hope you join us for the next episode of Dance Unscripted.